when you attend like a national chamber conference, you get asked a lot, and I'll not use my air quotes, what's your secret sauce there in Sioux Falls? How are you doing this? What are your answers to that?
Yeah, well, I'm being somewhat redundant here, but I don't know who started the tradition of cooperation, but there's an expectation of it that I felt immediately. Bob Munt and I, the CEO of the Development Foundation, we don't agree on everything, but we also know those that hired us don't expect us to come to them and say, we can't get an agreement on this. We bring forth solutions.
Thank you for joining us. We know that your time is valuable, and we appreciate you spending it with us.
This show is talking about beyond the blueprint and what happens kind of behind the scenes of the construction world, and also what happens in our lives from a family business and ranching and all the things that keep us building and moving forward.
And if there's something that you heard that resonates with you, whether it was a joke, an idea, please like this, share it with someone you know, and feel free to leave comments. We look forward to seeing what you have to say.
Let's dig in.
Welcome to the Two Bs in a Podcast. I'm Brad Jans with Jans Corporation, joined again by my brother Brian. Today, we are honored to be joined by Jeff Griffin, president of the Sioux Falls Chamber. Jeff, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks for being here.
If you would, maybe just start telling us a little bit about yourself and what brought you to Sioux Falls.
Sure. So a little about myself. People don't know this about me, but my career started as a criminologist and social worker, and I worked for many years in juvenile corrections back in Ohio. And I was on a city council in Worcester, Ohio. And that experience led to the opportunity for me to be the chamber president in Worcester, Ohio, now 16 years ago. Wow. So I've always been a nonprofit director, which the Chamber of Commerce is. But I had a career change there. I've now been a Chamber of Commerce executive longer than I worked in juvenile corrections. But that's kind of a fun fact that people in Sioux Falls don't know about me.
Sure.
But my wife and I, Rosie and I, have been married for 30 years. We have 3 adult children. The last one finishing up college in a couple years.
Great.
And we've been in Sioux Falls for 6 years. And what brought us here was the opportunity of a headhunter who was hired by the Sioux Falls Chamber of Commerce to find a new CEO. And I was in Illinois. And all respect to Illinois, there's not a lot of economic development going on right now. Some of the financial and political problems they're having.
Sure.
So I had advanced my resume to the job search committee, and so I was in his Rolodex, and this job popped open as one he thought I'd be a good fit for. Mm-hmm. One thing led to another, and now we've been here for 6 years.
I'm glad you're
awesome.
here.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So one question I had just to start, what is maybe one of the biggest misconceptions about the chamber?
Oh, one of the biggest, that we can solve every problem. I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that the chamber has a sole focus on any specific topic. And I say that because our Chamber of Commerce, not all chambers are this way, ours has such a diverse industry base. Mm-hmm. So sometimes it's confusing for members that if their priority isn't the chamber's priority.
Sure.
And our priority is the growth of the community, a healthy community. But like a real simple example, we have mental health groups that are part of the chamber, and we have education groups as part of the chamber. Well, if there's a bill in Peer advocating for dollars, one might sacrifice the other.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
So we need those parties to understand. In some cases, we don't take sides on that. We potentially could take sides on that. But that's one of the biggest misconceptions folks have. Join the Chamber of Commerce, you will support me on every single matter,
right.
And that's just not the case.
Sure. So what would you say you could contribute to actually like the driving growth we're seeing in Sioux Falls?
Yeah. Well, the Chamber of Commerce and Sioux Falls Development Foundation operate together with the Ford Sioux Falls overseeing. That's probably a whole mini series we could do on Ford Sioux Falls.
Sure.
But the short reason, in my view, that Sioux Falls has been so successful since its inception in 1987 is, I was just talking about business members' interests sometimes competing. In the aggregate, Sioux Falls has pooled dollars together for economic development. And the Chamber of Commerce and Development Foundation are certainly a driving force of that. And it's been proven over now. We're just finishing up the 9th campaign for Forward Sioux Falls. And when you have competing construction companies, competing banks, pulling healthcare organizations, pulling their dollars together for the advancement, that is not common across the country for economic development. I know chambers that do a capital campaign in competition with their economic development group. And that is not tolerated in South Dakota at all. So kind of the, when I moved here, when I interviewed here, I was just really struck with the solution mindedness. And it's got a small town feel to it, but it's not like a group of hayseeds that don't know what's going on. Very sophisticated, but cooperative.
Sure. Maybe you can touch a little bit about that, maybe how South Dakota or Sioux Falls has differed from Illinois with like public-private partnerships. What you've seen in your time here in 6 years.
So I don't want to dwell picking too. We could pick on other states too. But,
Sure.
I didn't realize how burdened I was in bureaucracy until I moved to Sioux Falls. And the best example I can give you, this example is getting somewhat, not dated because the benefit's still there, but the Southeast Tech Health Simulation Center. If folks are familiar with that project. That building was the Zeal building, and it was the Chamber and Development Foundation ecosystem for, 25 years, I think it was there. And when we decided to move Startup Sioux Falls to its new location downtown, which was a good decision, Bob Munt and I were thinking, well, geez, we've got this building. What are we going to do with this building? And it's a $6+ million asset. And we went into a meeting with some folks, and we thought, okay, what are we going to do with this $6 million? Well, and no exaggeration, within 45 minutes at this meeting, the governor's office was there, Avera, Sanford, Southeast Tech, and some business leaders. They worked it all out. Southeast Tech needed a health simulation center to educate more healthcare professionals. And within 45 minutes, we lost our $6 million asset. And Sanford and Avera ponied up to put the equipment in. The whole thing is in place. Now it's a beautiful facility. Mike Rowe visited recently. It's attracting healthcare professionals. We still have the asset. They pay us rent. But the whole thing was worked out within an hour.
That's crazy.
And I was blown away that this could be such a, not easy, but the tradition of cooperation runs deep.
And two competitors working together to support the industry and to support the community.
Correct.
That's impressive.
Well, and they've co-chaired, Avera and Sanford have co-chaired the past Forward Sioux Falls campaigns, the past two.
Yeah.
You probably don't normally see that in other Chamber of Commerces either.
It's less likely, for sure.
So when you think of the term economic development, I know there's people's opinions probably vary quite a bit on what that truly means. A hot topic we hear a lot about, some of it probably uneducated or misinformed.
Yeah.
The term TIF. Can you explain a little bit your perspective on that?
Yeah, so the tax increment financing has been used responsibly in Sioux Falls and across South Dakota to make these projects happen. And we're in the process of doing a whole education campaign to help educate the public about how a TIF is used. And it's not really a giveaway to collect taxes on yet to be improved equipment. My observation, I'll pull the lens back, whether it's a TIF or pipelines or data centers, there's a lot of anger right now in city council halls across the country.
Right.
I talked to chamber execs. So this bubbling up of anger creates mistrust, and I think we're still in the wake of the COVID mistrust.
Sure.
There's a lot more to it than, geez, these people are totally against data centers and TIFs. They just may not know. We have some people that are totally against it, for sure, but some people just want to know. And it's our job to help explain that to the general public. But we do have a segment of state leadership that really wants to slow down growth, and that's not the way to go, because once you slow down the growth, it's hard to turn that spigot back on.
Yeah.
You kind of get a reputation or businesses
Right.
start talking about you in a negative light.
Yeah. But I also want to be sensitive, we have over 1,800 business members. So from my seat, I get to interact with a lot of different people. And I think it's presumptuous economic development professionals to just feel like anybody that shows up in protest is against. They just want to be educated about it. They want to they're interested in their community and the growth. And a challenge we have is the wage gaps in our country and the wealth gaps. This stuff is real. So not that advocating for TIFs or pipelines or data centers isn't important to my day-to-day work, but I think we're at a crucial point in American history, and I'm not trying to be dramatic about that. I think we really are at a tipping point of people's politics. The data center protests, I saw a picture, and there was a guy in a MAGA hat standing next to a girl with purple hair, and they didn't look like they belonged in the same political party.
Right.
Okay,
Yep.
And being stereotypical there a bit, but that's the picture I saw. But they're both against data centers. And they're like, okay, how did we end up together?
That's right.
So there's some work we have to do. So we're only a 250-year-old experiment. So as part of a Chamber of Commerce, fighting for free enterprise and making sure we're playing within the rules is something I take very seriously.
Great.
Yeah.
You mentioned Forward Sioux Falls. It's been a great partnership between the Chamber and the Development Foundation. Can you explain a little bit from your experience in the 6 years of how that's gone?
Yeah.
What advancements you've seen from it and where you see the next one going as they're in that process right now?
Yeah. So the great thing about, I think the first Forward Sioux Falls campaign in '87 had like a $1 million goal, something like that. This one we're shooting for an $18 million goal. So the money's important. I don't want to minimize that contribution of the money because it helps fund a lot of programs, but it's not meant to fund in perpetuity for Foundation Park or Discovery District.
Right.
There's not perpetual funding. Startup Sioux Falls, all of these programs it funds will be weaned off of the dollars. SDSU's new Metro Center downtown, that'll be this campaign only. So I don't want to say more important than the dollars because we need the money to do the work. But the process of going out and meeting with the business leaders, we do a needs assessment prior to identifying the budget and drilling in on the actual goal.
Sure.
And that is earnest and genuine. And there's a saying: if you want money, ask for advice. And if you want advice, ask for money. And we kind of do both because we get behind the scenes and we hear the good and the bad. And we know it's hard for businesses to attract talent as we grow. So all the businesses that contribute to this are also competing with each other for talent. Right. And that's an interesting needle to thread. But that exercise in and of itself, I believe, helps unify the business community.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have the honor of serving on the diplomat committee for the Chamber.
Yeah.
Enjoy it. A couple things I've heard in the 5 years I've been on that is when you attend like a national Chamber conference, you get asked a lot, and I'll not use my air quotes, what's your secret sauce there in Sioux Falls? How are you doing this? What are your answers to that?
Yeah, well, I'm being somewhat redundant here, but I don't know who started the tradition of cooperation, but there's an expectation of it that I felt immediately. Bob Munt and I, the CEO of the Development Foundation, we don't agree on everything, but we also know those that hired us don't expect us to come to them and say, we can't get an agreement on this. We bring forth solutions. And that is an expectation on the business leadership side. And honestly, for the most part, we pick on peer a bit, but for the most part from peer and how we interact with peer. That's why it's so topsy-turvy when we're dealing with some legislators who won't even talk to us about issues. Right. That feels very foreign to a lobbyist who's been working for decades with that communication pattern. Right. So all that feels very disruptive. I've only been here 6 years, but all that feels very disruptive right now. So that secret sauce is the tradition of cooperation.
Sure. Do you think, and I guess referring specifically to Sioux Falls, but I know you deal with things on a state level too. Do you think as a community we have limitations when politics get involved, or how do you see that ultimately working out?
wish I had a crystal ball for that one.
Yeah.
That's part of what I'm observing right now, where I see some groups that felt like they were standing firmly on their political beliefs and who they had faith in, and feeling the sand erode from underneath what they thought they believed in. So the predictability of tariffs, I don't have experience in what we're dealing with right now. Quite frankly, I don't know if any businesses do, but I know that I have experience in unpredictable business environments create problems for businesses.
Absolutely.
And whatever business you're in.
Right.
So I don't have a blueprint or a playbook on how to navigate that right now.
Sure.
So I feel like it's got to break at some point. I just think it's going to be a painful process till we get to that point. And I don't want to shine. So there's a lot going on behind the scenes. I don't mean to be secretive, but like if we get word on work with refugees or immigrants, businesses, we direct them to resources. But I'm not hosting a webinar or attracting people to grand events. We don't want to attract a lot of attention, quite honestly.
Yep.
But there's a lot of connections that can be made in a chamber of commerce. So if this person knows this person, and make that connection that's right for them. Because when we work with the federal delegation, I mean, Leader Thune and Senator Rounds and Congressman Johnson, we work with them on future military operations, workforce deals, things like that. A lot of the national politics is really just a burdensome distraction right now. I don't mean to minimize, but it's really unpredictable right now.
Yeah.
It is, yeah. Through all that, obviously we've seen growth in Sioux Falls. You know, the chamber holds an annual meeting towards the end of the year every year, and I know not this last one, that was just last October, but the year prior, there was a slide that was shown about kind of comparing Sioux Falls to Sioux City, and it showed like in the early 80s the population, and then it showed current population, and I mean Sioux Falls had almost tripled the size of Sioux City. And I think that growth has exponentially grown in the last couple of years, probably, you know, since you've been here. What keeps you up at night, or what scares you about the growth of Sioux Falls?
That's a good question. Sioux City hates that slide.
I bet they do.
For sure. But it's part
Brian
of
was
it.
born there, by the way.
Oh, sorry.
Well, we don't talk about that.
Yeah, but you're here.
Yeah.
What keeps me up at night? I was just up last night. I don't want. Sometimes people say I'm being too dramatic, and I don't. I take the role of Chamber of Commerce, free enterprise, and freedoms in our country. I take that very, very seriously. I had a staff member the other day say, "Well, we aren't saving lives." I'm like, "No, I'm not. We're not surgeons. I understand that, but I think we are changing, or be part of changing lives." When I meet with students, first generation students at Washington High School, and getting a path towards college, that may be their first. I mean, they meet with me and think they're with a more important person than what I am, but they didn't have the same experiences I had growing up and connections to things. So I think we are a very important conduit for free enterprise in our country. And what keeps me up is the risk of losing that.
Sure.
And like I said, we're only 250 years old. If people think this thing's a forever, that somehow after all these generations and thousands of years that we're finally the ones that have figured this out and can tell the rest, that scares me.
Sure.
And
Absolutely.
I think we're at a real imbalance right now, some people's perceptions on how this country should be run.
Sure.
What keeps you up at night? The fall of democracy?
That'll do it.
That'll do it, yeah. I was going to shift gears a little bit back to the Chamber's involvement in workforce development. From being involved in a construction business, it's definitely a topic we talk about a lot. Can you maybe touch on a couple things the Chamber's doing for that? Yeah.
Well, actually, that we do work with that. It's a good example of Ford Sioux Falls dollars. The technical workforce development dollars go to the Development Foundation. The real tangible interactions with employers and commercial driver's license access, things of that nature. The Chamber's role on the education side is connecting our members with the universities, with the career tech academies to make sure the workplace and the school place that's sometimes two different languages at the pace of business and pace of education. So making sure we connect those two entities that they're communicating. A real challenge when you look at our nation has been a nomadic nation over the centuries. The challenge of moving, I'm speaking workforce, like blue collar type jobs. It is hard to move those people in those career fields from other states. There's just not as much support for that move as
we struggle
nothing
with
that's
that
been on their horizon. They're comfortable living where they live, but we have more work here for building the bridges and hands-on. So constantly promoting our community, making it easier for people to transition, but I don't know exact way to get through that hurdle. And the other thing on the traditional university side of keeping workforce here, the Summit League will be going on, Summit tournaments in town. So whenever the students from all those universities are here, the Development Foundation, they host a tailgate party, and we kind of woo the kids from Fargo while they're here. And the other university presidents, I don't know what they think about that, but we want to make sure they feel welcome, you know? We work with Augie, work with USF and all the universities to plug in and to see how we can make those students feel most welcome that come to South Dakota from other states.
Sure. You know, there's a commercial on TV with Dana on it that actually shows an old some old forward Sioux Falls conversations and political, or not political, but commercials. Actually has one of my good friends from college is still in the commercial where he's in a box getting shipped off. You know, we're talking about keeping our own people here locally, and I think that's still a big challenge to this day of trying to keep our own talent here. You know, so talking about other things that the chamber does, some of the things that you know, and you mentioned the policy advocacy. And you can't always win it right with everybody because sometimes your members are at opposing ends. But how does the chamber support a member in fighting for them in peer or at a national level?
Yeah. So we have a whole public policy handbook that our Issues Management Committee looks at every year. We keep that up to date and up to speed. And sometimes things are really simple, helping somebody navigate a sign ordinance, you know, getting them to the right city council members. Some of the stuff's very simple. Others are progressive over a series of years. We had the Spanish driver's test, which took a couple years to accomplish that, but that was access to the Spanish driver's test was important for them. Throughout the year, we gather intel, information, what's on people's minds, what are our top priorities, and then we assemble that into our legislative platform for whatever the coming year may be. Some of the federal work is more ongoing. The military, we've had a really long-standing tradition with military leadership in town. So when you get to talk to the Pentagon about what's going to be out here 20 years from now, those are fun conversations. They're really cool conversations to have. Right now, I brought it up before, but we are in communication with our federal leadership about ICE, and I know that is a very hot topic right now. And they are operating in South Dakota, not what you're seeing in Minneapolis, but it is affecting some day-to-day operations for some of our businesses in town. So that would be an example of I don't have a legal team, but we know to connect the small, say, restaurateur with that they can get accomplished what they need to accomplish.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I think we've probably been a chamber member for 35 since the 80s. Every business has the opportunity to improve. Recently, the chamber rolled out a new opportunity for different tiers of membership.
Yes.
You want to touch on that a little bit?
Yes, thank you. So I had a very important meeting with the business right before this. So the old model, we counted FTEs, you counted hotel rooms. It was very complicated. And about 2 years ago, we switched to a new tiered model. So there's just five levels. And with 1,800 members, that's a lot of meetings, but we're going through a 3-year process of meeting with everyone and getting them into the right level of investment for what they can want to contribute to the chamber. And then each level has advanced benefits to it. So it's all on our website, but if people have further interest in that, they can certainly reach out to us, and we're glad to come meet with them and talk them through the process. Absolutely. But at the core of it, some chambers are forced to do this sort of thing, a membership drive, so to speak. Yep. And I don't want to act like we don't have to work at that. It's always a challenge to bring in new members, retain members. but it was done to make our interactions of sales and retention easier for both parties.
Yeah.
Because in the old model, say, Brad, how's the bakery going? And you had 10 employees. Oh, great, I've got 16 employees right now. Like, oh, great, I'm gonna recalculate.
Right.
You just got to increase. So this is easier.
Yeah.
So I think it's human nature, and it's no different here, obviously, but change is tough. Change can be hard, especially when you've been doing the same model for 40, 50 years.
Yeah.
What are some other changes that the chamber has seen lately that you've been dealt with and had to?
Yeah. Well, we are investigating how we can best be impactful in agribusiness in Sioux Falls and across the state. So our chamber has had long stand since 1907, since its founding. It had roots in agriculture. We recently retired the livestock show, which was a 72-year tradition.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So
That didn't go over easy.
yeah, it was tough.
Yeah,
it was really
absolutely.
tough. It was actually a decision a few years in the making, and there were a variety of reasons for it. And I said this publicly, and I'll say it again because it's an advocacy. It's not our local fairgrounds leadership's fault,
Right.
but the county, city, all of us, we need to figure out how to get a world-class ag facility for our city. It's an embarrassment what we have. And Scott Wick and his team out there, and Julie Hammer, they're wonderful to work with. So it's not a criticism of them at all. But the facility was really a challenge for people bringing their animals to Sioux Falls.
Sure.
The tradition of losing it rippled throughout the agribusiness community because everybody showed animals there, and their kids and grandkids had showed them. So we hit the pause button and said, okay, without this event, which our agribusiness committee had spent a lot of time and effort in planning and at the event, what should be our focus with agribusiness? Because we have great connections with the pork and soybean and dairy, all of them. So we've gone through a couple-month process of surveying stakeholders, and at the end of February, we're having a all-day wrap-up session with leadership across agribusiness. And I don't know what that's going to be yet, because we obviously are going to be involved with it, just in what capacity. We just don't want to be in the way of it,
Right.
if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's great.
But I'll give you an example, going back to the advocacy thing. I know you didn't ask me a question, but you got me thinking of how these worlds come together. You know, the Smithfield announcement was just magnificent.
Huge. Yeah.
Huge. And Mayor Ted Haken and Bob Munt and the whole group got that thing across the finish line. Very grateful, because that could have left the country. Forget South
absolutely.
Dakota. It could have gone anywhere. But if you recall, bang the chamber drum here a minute, when Holstone was coming to town and there was a debate over the zoning for that pork processing plant, the chamber, we stood up to that slaughterhouse ordinance that was going to prohibit future slaughterhouses. I'll call them process. The language was we'll call them processes from being
within city limits.
correct. So I'm not taking Jeff Griffin credit for this, but think of we worked with pork and soybean, the auto dealers, Christine Erickson and others on that to fight that ordinance. And it was hard. It was difficult. I remember being at Rotary and other speaking groups. Oh, you're just Holstone's lapdog. It had nothing to do with Holstone. It had to do with preserving the zoning of being able for processing facilities to come. There was a lot of panic, emotion. We don't want to smell all these things. If we hadn't beat that back, there'd be an ordinance to not put in a new processing facility. And then Paul Tenhaken wouldn't have been able to do what Paul Tenhaken was able to do.
I think that's great. I mean, that highlights a lot of the decisions that are getting made sometimes feel like they're just being made in the spur of the moment and for a particular instance. But in this case, exactly, when that processing plant ultimately didn't get built, everybody's like, well, what was all the fuss for? Why did we do all that? But look at it now. Look what all of that work and effort did to allow for this to happen today. It's great.
Yeah, it doesn't feel so great at the time. And that's what we were talking beforehand. Sometimes chamber execs have a shelf life because too many of these things pile up. I hope that never becomes the case. I really like it here. But this Chamber of Commerce, beyond the networking and people getting to know each other, it is a courageous group of people, and it always has been. It's a courageous community.
So, Jeff, maybe you can share a couple things. Is there anything that goes on behind the scenes at the chamber that never really makes the headlines?
We sit around and complain about, no. What goes on behind the scenes that doesn't make the headlines? Well, I gave you one example of current operations with ICE. I don't want to dwell on that too much, but there's businesses that'll reach out to me with a matter they don't want public, but I'm able to, just because of the network, I'm able to get them to the right solution. There's no like smoke-filled rooms. There really isn't. There's 126 acres that we're going to get with Smithfield. There's no predetermined plan for that. I would say my behind closed doors, and I'm grateful for this, is I have a good number of business leaders who will tell me what I need to know. They're not bashful about it. And they'll call me out on things that maybe I've said publicly, that maybe I said something in this podcast. But I like that. I do get some good feedback from business leadership and their expectations of me. And then a lot of the, I'd say, the work between our religious groups, the school district, mental health, and nonprofit world, there's a lot of sense in homelessness. There's a lot of levers amongst that we get to be a part of, but it becomes more difficult for the impact you can have. And what I mean is, we have a great nonprofit community in town, for sure. And unfortunately, the funding for that, sometimes they're in competition for the same dollars and whoever their funders are. And if they get tied, like the homelessness issue, that's a community-wide issue, and sometimes those that serve the homeless population get scapegoated for problems they don't necessarily have control over. And then that has a ripple effect. So there's probably a lot of conversations on how those things can be solved that's not necessarily public-facing.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
So the members that you work with obviously range from a mom and pop shop to some pretty large corporations that reside here in Sioux Falls. We're a smaller business. Of all our companies, we're about 70 employees. What's kind of our ROI for joining the chamber for
36 years?
Yeah. What is it in it for companies like us to be a part of it?
So we just had a new member coffee this morning. Had about 50 new people there. Awesome. It was great. And what I tell them is, for the most part, small businesses will join the chamber because they want to increase their network, and that's great. Right. But then I ask them to consider, beyond that, the infrastructure, the plannings for recreation, park planning, getting good people into office, the education systems. The advocacy, the stick that I can swing on behalf of 1,800 members is a powerful, and it's because of the Chamber of Commerce. I get a great deal of responsibility because of the tradition with the Chamber of Commerce. But it's not a struggle to get in front of the right people to propose solutions. So you're part of this aggregate force, and it's meaningful. Yeah. And I ask people to not just consider. Once I picked on an insurance guy this morning, I didn't mean to, but like the financial advisor or the banker or the insurance person that tells us, oh, we don't want to renew, we don't come to the mixers anymore because we're too busy. Right. I say, well, you're welcome. I'm glad you filled up your book of business from coming to mixers, but don't forget about it. For the most part, I'll find somebody that can get them to retain their membership.
Yeah. I mean, I think there can be a lot of nearsightedness in businesses. Like, you think if the chamber's spending time working on a project like Smithfield, well, they're obviously a national company that's not even from here, but those individuals that are going to be employed there are probably going to be utilizing a lot of the businesses that do reside here. And being able to consider that without that business here, there's a lot of people that don't have a job here in town.
Right. Yeah. I have, I talk about the politics a lot because there's a lot that lands on my plate, but last week I had 2 phone calls. Well, I had more phone calls than that, but 2 friends of mine, and they're They're both members of the Chamber of Commerce, and they're politically opposite. And the one said I was being too conservative, and the other said I was being too liberal. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm good.
You're in the middle.
Yeah. And we might lose them both as chamber members. I don't want that to happen, but these are these are two small businesses, but I know who they hang out with. So even that interaction is part of your ROI, getting people together.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the group you helped found, Brian, with the Young Professionals Network, 950 members.
That's incredible. It was a fun group to be a part of. I know my wife and I actually were part of the initial group that got that started, and it's nice to see that even after graduating over 6 years ago now, that it's stronger than it ever has been.
That's fantastic.
We share a little bit more about the Young Professionals.
No, they're cruising along great, and it's like having a second chamber of commerce. It really is. And you guys heard me joke about it. I call it the second largest chamber of commerce in the state of South Dakota, because the Elevate Rapid City, they combined their chamber and economic development. Well, that's another.
Right.
That's another. They're good friends, but
Yeah, right.
the 950 YPN members, many of them are employees of longtime chamber members.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I love that tradition, because that is getting passed to another. But so many of them are new to town, and they have a small business and meeting new people.
Right.
So they have a lot of similar programming. They have a mixer, and I get my names all twisted up of what
Off
their
the
things
clock.
off the clock. Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't go to many of them. They have
Seat at the table.
advocacy
I'm
group.
still doing the
Seat at the table
Yep, it's
is a
great
big
one.
one, and it's a really good group. Getting younger all the time
Yeah.
for me.
Yeah.
Can a guy just like grow a mustache and all of a sudden be young again
No.
and get to sit in it?
No, but here's a little secret. Not even a secret. It's okay to go to a YPN event. In fact, when business leaders who have retired past the age of 40 show up, it's part of what they like. They get to make a new connection.
Sure. Absolutely.
Don't stay till it closes. Leave when it's time to leave.
Yep. Is there something that you could share where you've maybe taken heat for something that you didn't think you should have?
This week, I don't ever want to make it be like a martyr or a pity party. I'm trying to think of the best example. I'm going way back in time here, but the COVID and the masking.
Yep.
I don't know if that something like that's going to happen again, but I pray to God it doesn't. Is that? But I still feel like we're in the wake of that.
Sure.
So at that time, if you recall, the masking and the city council wanted to do a mandate on masks, and then that was going to have a financial consequence to it for businesses that didn't enforce it. And we opposed that because our small businesses, they don't had the security guard. We didn't want to set up that point of conflict to be the responsibility of the bakery owner. And that was really, everybody was doing the best they could at the time.
Yeah.
The city council was trying to do their thing. And I had the bright idea, let's survey the membership, which we did. 50.1% to 49.9%. Well, that didn't work out at all. But we decided to work against that ordinance. And that was just a lot of frustration heat coming our way. Sure. That was the one time I've had my the one time I've had my life threatened.
Really?
That's how emotional that was at all. That was that's not a great feeling. That's when you know things are spinning out of control.
Yeah.
You know, and to look back on that time, but we were part of it, man, and we didn't shy from the being in the arena.
Well, and kudos to you, because there was no handbook. There was no manual on how to handle this. And again, you said there's people that are stay convicted and stay true, and I think the chamber certainly did that through that whole
Uncharted
process.
waters.
Yeah,
it sure was.
What would you? I know you said you've been kind of in the nonprofit world for your entire career, but what would you say is harder, running a business or running a chamber?
Running a business, I would guess.
It's a chamber. You're running kind of multiple businesses, right? You got to deal with all the business owners.
Yeah. The hardest part is when you said, well, run it like a business. And then when you do, they say, what are you doing that for? So, for example, we have if there's a certain event, it's been ticketed at a certain price for a while.
Yeah.
My prices are going up, and they're like, no, we can't raise the ticket price. Well, I thought we were a business, There's some balance to it in that regard. So I've never run, full disclosure, I've never run my own business like you all do. Right. So I get to see the challenges that you all have with competition, workforce, and so forth.
Right.
But then I get to work with you.
Right.
So I don't know if one's more difficult than the other. I think the Lord blesses us each with our own talent, and we end up where we're supposed to be.
Yeah.
And I think what happens in Sioux Falls, in communities like Sioux Falls, is when the business owners appreciate the whole community and not just their not just their corner of the world.
Sure.
That's a gift.
Yep.
And to pick on Peoria one more time, or Illinois, when you're in a community that there's not enough for everyone to eat, then they cannibalize, and those relationships erode. You know, I'm from Northeast Ohio, and I tell people it's dated, not because the Chiefs aren't good anymore, but I'd say I feel like I traded from the Browns to the Chiefs because you're part of a winning team now.
Yeah.
And there is vibrant competition between businesses, but thus far there's been enough for everybody to eat.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, you mentioned the word balance. How much of a challenge is it to balance like growth and community values?
Yeah, so when you related to like crime numbers or infrastructure, that is another one that keeps me up at night. I know the example I gave was the government operations, but as we grow, keeping up with the safety services and the infrastructure, it's a challenge because, I mean, Lincoln County is one of the 10 fastest growing counties in the whole country.
Yeah.
And we see the growth pains right now of how two different counties can see the world differently. There's not a whole lot of communities growing at the pace we are. And this is something we're making sure we're talking to mayoral candidates about. We're going to be talking to mayoral candidates about because Mayor Tenhaken has been wonderful and proactive and forward thinking. So as we continue to grow, it's going to continue to look different. But there's a lot of transplants here. Obviously, you grow at this pace. They're not all coming from other communities in South Dakota.
Yeah.
Yeah. We just don't like to see construction companies moving to town.
Nobody does.
Right.
Nobody in your business would.
Well, we're just talking about nearsightedness and laser. Yeah.
I was in Rapid City for Sanford's announcement out
Yeah.
there, their expansion out there. And somebody out there said, "What are you doing out here?" I said, "I'm thinking of opening a branch of the Sioux Falls Chamber out here."
That would be great.
We'll join.
Yeah, perfect.
So, Jeff, what in the 6 years you've been here, what do you see Sioux Falls looking like in 10 years from now?
50,000 more people is what the numbers tell us for sure.
Yeah.
You know, like the cybersecurity presence, what Dakota State's doing right now, and that taking root, that could have a huge spin-off effect as you see spin-offs with the banking industry's work here. Well, Smithfield coming here, all the spin-offs surrounding that. So I really like the position we're in, being known for, as AI grows, that cybersecurity and that computer intelligence could really open avenues for coastal employers having people live in the middle of the country.
Sure.
Yeah. And I mean, as it grows, the rest of South Dakota is going to seem a lot smaller. And that concerns me on a statewide deal because of smaller communities, if a school system's shrinking and those sensitivities, because in a lot of states where you have in Omaha and the rest of or Chicago and downstate, you know, the state I grew up in Ohio, you've got Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati, so you got multiple things. But states that have one big mega like we do, I want to be very intentional about our relationships with the rest of the state because I don't want to be the unapproachable big chamber. So regionalism is a big topic. And sometimes when I say regionalism, people say, "You mean Harrisburg?" I'm like, well, and we need to look at it as a regional. And when I say regional, I'm talking Brookings to Vermilion to Mitchell, that marketing that region to the world.
Yep.
And I think that's where we need to position ourselves. I know that I don't say it's scary, but that sounds foreign to some people when I say that. But I think that's really the direction we need to look at.
Yeah. So I know like there's the Sioux Metro Growth Alliance that's
correct
in the surrounding. How has the chamber partnered with them or worked with them?
Very closely. So last year we went to Des Moines. The Greater Des Moines Partnership is a regional economic group with 26 chambers of commerce in a 60-mile radius. And Tyler Tortson, Sioux Metro Growth, and Mayor Wink from Harrisburg came with us. So to answer your question, closely.
Right.
But their clients are all the small towns, and it's hard, when you have Crooks and Canton, the list, to organize regional economic development, and each of those communities wants
They're fighting.
their want, and I don't blame them, but their trustees and the elected officials have to provide for their constituencies.
Right. Yep.
So that's why a chamber and a Sioux Metro Growth Alliance with the utility companies, the financial, the construction, the businesses that serve the whole region can help drive that.
Yeah.
And then the natural market encouraging those things, it happens without us announcing it. Dakota State is my example. They're in Madison. Mm-hmm. We went to Pierre. Now they're here. Yep. We worked with Senator Crabtree and others in Madison to help make that exchange happen. That's regionalism.
Yeah.
Sometimes these things happen without us calling it what it is.
Right. Well, even SDSU, you mentioned SDSU.
Right.
They're moving to USD Discovery District. I mean,
correct.
We're seeing that support.
Every time I mention a university, I should mention them all. They're all partners. But Sioux Metro Growth is a good ally of ours.
Sure, absolutely. You talked about cybersecurity and obviously that industry as a whole and the whole IT world, but what other industries do you see kind of winning or growing, or is there new industries coming to the city or to the community?
Well, I think with the healthcare is going to continue to be essential. So the rural healthcare can radiate out even further, and as that service grows statewide, people-wise could find its home more in Sioux Falls. Yep. So advances in healthcare services. We still have a little room at Foundation Park, and with C.J. Schwann's coming in, and Smithfield going out there, could be another opportunity. Now you've become a hub right there on the interstate. So that is, that's a renewal of another 100 years of work, man. We're the egg roll. We didn't even talk about C.J. Schwann's egg roll capital of the world.
Right.
Who would have ever
They're going to be
thought?
right here. Yeah.
Who would have ever thought? Science related to agriculture. It's just so hard to predict what's going to take shape.
Which I think is great for our community. It's not just one. We're not just one egg in the basket.
The diversity is strong.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Jeff, what's maybe one thing that you would consider might be a possible risk for Sioux Falls?
The risk, I don't know how many. I keep talking about growth and the rapidness of growth. Mm-hmm. So the risk is, if our city administration, it hasn't been a problem, we need to keep the city administration focused on looking towards that growth.
Yep.
And accepting that growth and celebrating that growth. So on an infrastructure standpoint of how that looks. And then the diversity of people moving here and coming here from other parts of the country and other parts of the world, that's an opportunity, but I also think it's a risk if we miss that opportunity. Sure. Mm-hmm. So getting so many different international traditions absorbed into Sioux Falls, it's a challenge for certain.
So maybe strategic growth is a good term for the planning and stuff that have gone into how we've grown recently, but for the future.
But there are certain international factors that, we know for a fact Ukrainians have moved here, the trouble in Ukraine. Mm-hmm. And I have 2 Ukrainian neighbors. I've never lived in a more diverse neighborhood than I did in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, which is really interesting to me because I've lived in a lot of places. And I know their churches are working with refugees to get them acclimated here. So this is kind of more of the things that aren't talked about publicly, but finding them access to education, training, these people that want to work. And when we categorize them as, we don't need that group, it's an overstatement, and we all know that. Mm-hmm. So finding that balance in there, we're a nation of immigrants, and we're going to continue to be so. So I think there's an opportunity there, but it's a risk if we don't accept that responsibility.
Sure.
As a construction company and we do some development work, what's kind of your inside information, so to speak, for us of what should we as builders and developers be looking for. What should something we should kind of keep our pulse on as the city continues to grow.
Well, Brad runs in a lot of the same circles I do, and there's a lot of the same events, and there's no substitute for rubbing elbows with the people. So not getting into any non-disclosure agreements with you. Businesses that are true to themselves, like you guys are, for sure, your tradition, true to their values and their core values, and are out there meeting the right people, they'll find the right connections so that they're successful. Because I don't know where the next industrial park is going to go. Right. That's part of our discussion right now with regionalism. Would it have to be within city limits, outside of city limits, whatever?
Yeah, you're starting to get a little boxed in. I know the airport is always a good conversation of, where does that growth happen and how? Yeah.
I was in a conversation, they talked about moving the airport. And I learned a lot because they said, well, Mitchell would be the closest place we could move it to, the land they needed.
Wow.
But then they followed up with, but don't worry, in like 20 years, we won't need runways. I'm like, what? What are you talking? That feels a little aggressive to me. Maybe they said 30. And I'm like, what are you talking about? They're like, no, they'll just take off and go. I was like, okay, hope I'm around for that.
Yeah.
That sounded cool. But I don't know how I got on that tangent.
No, that's really cool. I mean, it's great to think about. Again, you don't know what innovation and the future holds for
the airport authority. Will probably yell at me for you're not supposed to tell people that, but I don't know when that's coming. That's just part of the future and how that's gonna work for us.
You can just park one in your driveway. You don't need it.
That's what they're talking about. Who knows what the future holds? But I don't think there'll ever be a substitute for hand-to-hand combat and getting to know one another. I mean, maybe I'm a traditionalist. I am a traditionalist, but I think people want to look the person they're doing business with in the eye.
Yep. We got some kind of lightning round questions and just some kind of quick hitter stuff. And then I do have a story I want to tell you about. That's my favorite chamber story of my experience there that my wife is not going to enjoy. But
okay, well, it's your funeral.
So we mentioned TIFs, talked about TIFs. Do you think, how necessary are they? How are they overused? Are they underused? Do we need to use them more? Real quick, just what's your take on the word TIF? And
you realize just me answering that, some people say, oh yeah, of course he would. It was like, attaboy. So objectively, I can tell you the history of TIFs being used in Sioux Falls have been responsible.
Right.
And in the end, as they start to roll off 15, 20 years, then the benefit back to our school districts and tax base
shows that.
Absolutely.
Data centers, are they a long-term win, long-term loss?
Long-term win with responsibility. Some communities across the country are overextending themselves to bring them in. In Sioux Falls, we haven't, not just rolling over to bring as many in as possible. Right. But it's a good example, I think, of it's okay for people to ask questions about unknown technology. That's okay. It's not
encouraged, right? Like you don't want people just to automatically say no. Ask the question. Let's learn more about it.
And that's part of the tinfoil hat crowd that shows up that's just against everything.
Right.
Because you just lose credibility. Yeah. You're not for anything we're trying to do here. Right. So I'm really not going to listen. Mm-hmm. But there are then also people we just want to understand this. Right. They don't know. Yep. So I want to make sure we're bridging that gap.
Absolutely.
too.
Yeah, that whole theory of like, well, my mom's against it, so I am too.
Yeah. It's okay for us to talk about these things.
For sure.
So how about political divide? Do you think that's media narrative or true issue that needs to be discussed?
Oh, I think it's a true issue that needs to be discussed. I just don't know how time is going to drive the solution. Mm-hmm. And people are going to decide where their pain point is. And sometimes I'm accused of talking too much. I mean, I'm a moderate person. And I don't know exactly how conservative fiscal principles have gotten all wrapped up with religion and morality, and there's just a bundling of issues and hypocrisies that is troubling, and I think people notice that. I mean, I'll give an example. Last week out in Pierre, well, Brad, you were there. There was a 45-minute discussion on teachers unions, and all they were trying to solve is that the teacher union contribution could not be taken from their paycheck because that's a tax-funded payroll system. They were just union busted. Right. And it was so obvious, and they're not going to save any money on the payroll system. And I get the point to a degree because the national union can then be too demonstrative. Right. But who amongst any of them sitting down there could track their 401k dollars and everything? Even within churches, you have churches dividing over social issues. Mm-hmm. There's got to be a finish line to this, and it's just going to be a painful one to get there. But it's part of our national experiment.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know. I'm over answering your question, but a lot of people are experts on what George Washington or Jesus wanted, and they're here to tell us about it. It just gets all convoluted over. Okay, let's talk about bricks and mortar and solutions. That's why I want to focus on TIF education. Some things that the chamber can naturally and should be doing, and not just into yelling at each other.
Absolutely. Yep.
So the mayoral election's coming up.
Yes.
Do you think it's going to be calm or contentious?
Well, I know all of the candidates, and I know them all to be both of those things. I've worked with all of them. And I think you don't go through a mayoral election. So if it's important, there should be some contentiousness to it, right? It's been really quiet. People are saying, when is this going to start heating up? I'm like, I don't know. I'm not advancing it to heat up, but I think there's going to be some tough questions to answer about what you guys just asked. I'm not running for mayor, but plans for growth, the mentorship stuff that Mayor Tenhaken leaves behind. There's going to be some really good questions.
Do you think that maybe has impacted the race because there's such big shoes to fill? We obviously, as you mentioned, you supported Tenhaken, and we both do too. He's a great guy, did a great job. Does that make this election a little tougher because that's a high bar to come into?
No, I'm just kidding. It is a high bar to come into, and he's still obviously earning his paycheck, man, for sure. He's going to go. He's going to work to the last day.
Still,
So I don't want to read the minds of it's a pretty seasoned group of folks that are running for mayor, and they've been around the block a few times. Mm-hmm. So I don't think anyone want to burn their gunpowder too quickly because there's still a long time till the election. Yeah. So in the social media world we live in, quite frankly, people are more cautious about what I may not have been the last 40 minutes, but people are more cautious about what they want to talk about.
Yeah.
But as the candidate forums start up, which we have one on April 7th, our Good Morning Sioux Falls, we're going to have a mayoral panel as part of that. But I think we have a great group of candidates.
Great.
I know I already asked the one about the biggest risk, so what would you say, Jeff, is one thing maybe a business owner should know or understand right now?
One thing a business owner should know or understand. We talk about the more generations in the workplace than ever before, and I think knowing and understanding how that affects a work dynamic is really good for the workplace. We've hired 4 people in the last year, and I think they're all young, really young. So we have employees like 20 to in their 60s, and as far as I know, it's going pretty well. But I'm really optimistic about. I don't have lazy young workers. I don't know if you guys do, and I'm not asking you to say that out loud. But how work flow goes from one generation to the other, I think, is profound. It's a real difference. Like my kids, my own adult children, when to talk to people in person and when to text them. As simple as that sounds. We're a social organization, so there's a time for email and text, but there's also a time where you got to talk to people.
For sure.
Yeah. But I also know the way I hear the world and see the world as a Gen Xer. I was basically raised as a feral animal out on playgrounds. I see the world a lot differently than my 20-year-old.
My mom didn't always know where I was.
For months.
So the story I have for you. One of the generalizations I've always heard about chambers is like, oh, you just are the ribbon cutting people. You just cut all these ribbons. And the Sioux Falls Chamber does a lot of ribbon cuttings, which is great. I mean, it's good notoriety, it's good publicity, and there's just a lot happening in our community. But when I was serving on the board of the chamber and got to know a lot of the staff pretty well, and my wife was pregnant with our third child, and I tend to like to play some pranks. And the first two kids' births were fine and uneventful. The third one, I could tell she was ready to be done. And so I went to the chamber staff and I said, hey, would I be able to borrow a pair of those scissors? I'd really like to take them into the delivery room to cut that umbilical cord. So they're, sure, we have an extra set. Here you go. So I had them in the back of my car for about 3 weeks. And sure, it was time to go take her to the hospital. And we got to the hospital and I pulled these pairs of scissors out of the back. I mean, they're 3 feet long. It's like, hey, guess what? I'm ready. It did not go over well.
How long were you in a cast?
I had to keep them out of her reach, but
The big scissors, yeah. The most stereotypical chamber thing.
Right, yeah.
That's all. I thought you said you had a ribbon cutting at the birth. That
we should have.
Yeah.
I mean,
live.
Right.
That's awesome.
It was fun. It was a good staff you have. The people there are great. They're really good to work with.
Thank you.
Enjoyed every chance we've had to work with the chamber. And Brad's involvement lately too has been great to see his connection within your group.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here. I think you're doing a fantastic job. And
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us today. I mean, this has been great to just have a conversation and
Hey, thanks for having me.
forward to more. Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Is there anything you want to say to future chamber members out there that you'd like to say?
Oh,
hey,
we're always recruiting new chamber members, and we want you to join the cause. Most of the attraction comes from people knowing people and want to be part of it. But I will say, once you have chamber members who have known each other for 50, 60 years, and the relationships like a Craig Lloyd had with a Bernie DeWalt, that stuff's special.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm not taking credit for that. That may have happened with or without the chamber, but having a touch point or social activities and professional development, we need more people. Because the recruitment process of people moving to town, I mean, don't underestimate. Like, I moved here and brought a wife and kids with me. And Rosie has her own interests outside of the Chamber of Commerce. So her being welcome to the community, was also nice. And when we have folks moving in, they want to be involved in the symphony or tennis or soccer or whatever it is, we need that network of people to get folks connected.
Yep. And there's certainly plenty of options here for people to get involved.
Plenty of options. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
appreciate it. Thank you very
Appreciate it.
much.
Yes, sir.
We appreciate you listening. Everything we do is a collaboration, and we appreciate you being here to share this with us.
Yeah, our goal is always the same, to build relationships, to build structures, and to tell the stories that we've experienced along the way.
Feel free to drop us a comment, share it with a friend, and like this podcast.
Or call me if you just want to talk about cows.
So until next time,
Keep building. No, get out of here.